It is day 31 now of the partial government shutdown, and there is consensus about one thing, that the shutdown is good for no one. Not for the president, not for Republicans, not for Democrats, and certainly not for the 800,000 federal employees still out of work or working without getting paid, who this week will now miss their second full paycheck. So with all of that, it really does still boggle the mind why there is still no consensus on bringing this to an end. They're not even talking. There is no urgency. And the fact that there is no urgency is, I think, maybe what should be most unsettling for everyone. But why? For that, let's go to Capitol Hill, a veritable ghost town right now, except for CNN's Phil Mattingly. He's joining me now. Phil, there's a lot of talking past each other. There you are. It was a ghost town because you didn't actually pop up on my screen. There's a lot of talking past each other. But where do things stand right now? What is your gut telling you, and what are your sources telling you?
Yeah, it's still at an impasse, and that's just kind of the blunt assessment of where things stand generally. Now, if you want to talk about things that are actually going to happen this week, there is going to be legislative movement. Look, over the course of the last 4 weeks, Kate, we've seen House Democrats move bill after bill after bill to try and reopen the federal government, all of which has been rejected by the president, and as such was rejected by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, the Republican-controlled Senate. This week, the Senate is going to try and move its own proposal, one that closely mirrors what the president laid out this weekend, $5.7 billion for a border barrier or border wall, also temporary protection for DACA recipients that are currently enrolled, as well as those with temporary protected status. So there's something that's going to happen in the United States Senate today. There's also going to be included in that all 7 of the unpassed appropriations bills as agreed upon by the House and Senate, an extension of the Violence Against Women's Act, $12 billion in disaster relief funding. So some issues there in the Senate bill that they're trying to basically coax Democrats to come along with them. And yet, at this point in time, no Democrats have said they're interested. Their baseline has remained the same throughout the course of this process, which is reopen the government. We're happy to have a discussion about border security. The president has made clear the government will not reopen until he gets money for that wall. So long as those two baselines, which have stayed completely static over the course of the last 31 days, remain the same, we remain in the same place, and that is without a clear way out.
Yeah. Yes, and yes. You are right as always, and it still makes me depressed every time we talk. Thank you, Phil. It's great to see you. At least you're working. An alarming new number is also coming out from the TSA as we enter the second month of the government shutdown. 10% of TSA employees called out sick nationwide yesterday. Nationwide, 10%. Compare that to a year ago, it was 3.1% of call-outs. CNN's Renee Marsh is at Reagan National Airport with much more on this. Renee, if you need to know, if you look no further for real-world impact than what we are really now seeing when it comes to TSA, what are you hearing?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that statistic that you gave off the top alone, I mean, that's more than 3 times what we saw last year as far as call outs. So, you know, it is clear that as this continues to drag on, this partial government shutdown, things are not going to get better at airport security checkpoints. It's not going to get better for TSA. Since this shutdown began, we have seen progressively the number of TSA employees calling out increase. On Saturday, it was 8%. Sunday, it's 10%. And as you mentioned, they're going to miss a second paycheck on Friday. So, you know, we expect that those numbers will continue to climb. At least that's what people are telling me. You know, look at the airports. You're seeing the real life impacts playing out. BWI Airport, it's a major airport in Baltimore. They were forced to shut down a security checkpoint because of, in the words of TSA, excessive call outs. You saw a similar situation in Miami about a weekend ago. You saw Houston's George Bush Intercontinental Airport. They were also forced to shut down a checkpoint because of lack of staffing. And Atlanta Airport, the world's busiest, also had security lines shut down because of lack of staffing. So we're talking about multiple major airports here shutting down checkpoints because they simply don't have the staff. We do know that TSA is they're answering the call for the need for staff at these checkpoints by deploying backup officers. We know that backup officers were sent to Atlanta as well as Newark. But again, we are seeing that this is getting to the point where the numbers continue to increase here as it relates to call outs. And the number one concern is what kind of impact will that have on security? The agency continues to say there is no impact on security. However, many of the TSA employees that I'm talking to say that is their number one concern because they're clearly doing more with less. There are fewer people showing up to work, but they have the same mission every day to secure the airports and commercial aviation.
And just logically, it's just going to continue to get worse. It's not at some point going to just turn around and start getting better as this thing drags on. Renee, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Even more real-world impact is out there. All 40,000 members of the U.S. Coast Guard are still going without pay today because it's the only branch of the U.S. military that falls under the Department of Homeland Security budget, which is where this whole fight is all about. Take a look at what that means. This is video that we're showing right here, of video of members of the Coast Guard saying goodbye to their families just yesterday as they left for a multi-month deployment. These are service members that are not getting paid while serving their country. The former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, retired General Martin Dempsey, he called it, quote, in a tweet, a harsh and avoidable burden on them. Someone may eventually declare victory in the shutdown, he writes. It will be a Pyrrhic victory. Responsible leaders acknowledge limits. Joining me right now is a former Republican Congresswoman from Utah, Mia Love. Mia, it's great to see you. Thank you for coming in. She's now a CNN political commentator.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. Thank you.
Of course, of course. It's great to see you. How bad? It's so depressing to have to form the question this way. I think it's the only way to formulate it at this point. How bad is it going to have to get before the fever breaks and they start talking right now?
Well, unfortunately, the American people that the politicians in Washington are supposed to protect are the ones that are in the crosshairs while there's this political battle. Let's call it exactly what it is. It's a political battle. There are two points I want to make that I think is incredibly important. The first point is Mark Meadows, who's a good friend of mine, who's a major confidant of the president, will not let him go under the $5.7 billion for border security. He won't. He is adamant about it. They talk about it all the time. He is not going to let him do that because he believes that this is a promise that the president made on the campaign trail. And if he lets that go, then there is no hope for him to have to become the U.S. president in the next term. So that is not going to happen.
Well, that's what But Mark Meadows is saying that, but nothing's stopping the president from doing what the president wants. We've seen that time and again.
The president can do, obviously, the president can do whatever he wants. I'm just mentioning that his allies are telling him not to give up on this. Look at this because this is the long game. Here's the other thing. I think Nancy Pelosi knows that. I think Nancy Pelosi knows that this is a done deal for the president if he budges on the $5.7 billion. The other thing that we have to think about is in the last year, I was part of the Congress that voted for an $867 billion farm bill. So you have to ask yourself, what is $5.7 billion? Is it just a wall, or can Speaker Pelosi actually get everything that she wants when it comes to immigration reform? And if that's the case, that's a small price to pay when you're giving people their paychecks, when you're opening up government and you're getting temporary protective status relief for people who are here, who are working, who have families, who are actually contributing to the economy, and a permanent solution for DACA recipients. So I think that this is a golden opportunity for her to say, I'm going to get everything that I want. I think that's the only way that this whole thing goes away and both sides get exactly what they want and the American people can get back to work.
It's so hard to believe that both sides are going to get exactly what they want in just how this whole thing is played out. But again, crazier things happen. They happen every day. We will see. But the president laid out a new offer on Saturday from the White House. Democrats rejected the offer outright. The thinking has been, it remains today, and it has been all along from Democrats, is that they cannot reward the president. They can't reward the president's behavior by giving in now. Do you see that?
Well, I think that if the president's not going to budge, which means no one's going to budge, and the people who are suffering are the ones that they're not the ones in Washington. So I've always said, do not let perfect be the enemy of a really good win. So you have to get the pride out of the way. The president has to get his pride out of the way. The Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats have to get their pride out of the way and realize that the work that they're being paid, by the way, they actually get paid to do.
I hate to say this, but what is going to get their pride out of the way? Because they're not going to do it. I venture to guess no one's going to be doing it voluntarily. I fear that something bad is going to have to happen to kind of scare everybody back to the negotiating table. And I hope to God that's not what it is.
I hope not either. You know, when you think about a big crisis, it usually takes a major crisis for this country to come back together. And the last time that happened was 9/11. It was the worst day that I can remember in our history. But it was the thing that we got out of it was a unity that we haven't seen since. So unfortunately, that is what happened to cause us to come back together. But I can tell you right now, I hope that that's not the case. I really hope that the president can get what he wants. Speaker Pelosi can get what she wants on immigration reform, and they can go on and work on other things. On
kind of the flips, I don't know if this is the flip side of all of it, but the president is also, after this weekend, was taking heat from the right, the far right as well.
Yeah.
Them calling his proposal over the weekend amnesty, which of course they hate, even though when you look at what he was offering, it's not amnesty. Should the president let that opposition to anything, the opposition to him moving off his deal at all, should that rule the day? I mean, I guess as a Republican, what do you say to Ann Coulter?
I can tell you, as a Republican, it was one of the major frustrations that I had. Major legislation that would help us as Republicans. Over-the-counter contraceptives that, you know, as you know, I'm a pro-lifer. This is something that would have been able to allow women to make decisions before they had to make the decision of keeping or ending the life of their child. Making that available. The biggest opposition I had was from Republicans. And so it's really one of the things that has always been frustrating to me is having Republicans allow perfect be the enemy of a really good win. And I think that we've had some major losses because of that. I honestly believe that we could have had immigration reform done if it weren't for some Republicans that were just sticking their foot in the ground saying, I'm not going to budge on this at all. And you're going to see the same thing here. You're going to get the Ann Coulters that are going to say, hey, if it's not perfect, it's not good enough.
Let me play for you how Vice President Pence kind of characterized this moment, if you will, yesterday. Listen to this.
One of my favorite quotes from Dr. King was, "Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy." You think of how he changed America. He inspired us to change through the legislative process to become a more perfect union. That's exactly what President Trump is calling on the Congress to do. Come to the table in a spirit of good faith. We'll secure our border. We'll reopen the government.
NAACP came out quickly. Others calling that comparison an insult to King's legacy. Do you see it that way?
I think that anybody who wants to shine themselves in a good light, I mean, Martin Luther King is always going to be a great example of a person who fought for individual rights. Anytime that I can try and emulate that type of leadership and that type of love that this man had for his fellow man is a good thing. I hope that we could do it with actions more than just words. And Martin Luther King was a great human being that all of us should take his example and move things forward and do what's right, not just for us, but for our future, our children and the people that surround us.
Congresswoman, thank you so much. I was just being told in my ear right after the break, we were being told that, well, there wasn't anything planned on the schedule. We were told that the president and the vice president, they are...
These are local expert advisors that will partner with you to find the...
Joining me now, you're watching right now, as the president and the vice president are at the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial in Washington, D.C., and we were watching joys of live television. Looks like the cameras are moving around, but we do know that they laid a wreath at the memorial. We'll bring you anything more that we get. This is actually from moments ago. Let's watch this together.
Thank you for being here.
And there you have it once again. The president, the vice president, marking the life and legacy of the great Martin Luther King Jr. on this MLK Day at the memorial. We'll bring you anything more if there's any more video that comes out. We wanted to bring that to you. But we're also watching this. If you are having a hard time keeping track of President Trump's ties to Russia at this point, you are not alone. And maybe they want it that way. Adding to the confusion over the weekend, President Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, offered this new timeline of events when it comes to the Trump Tower in Moscow.
Well, it's our understanding that they went on throughout 2016. Weren't a lot of them, but there were conversations. Can't be sure of the exact dates, but the president can remember having conversations with him about it.
Throughout 2016?
The president also remembered. Yeah, probably could be up to as far as October, November. Our answers cover until the election. So anytime during that period, they could have talked about it.
That is not what we have heard in the past, just to be clear. Let me bring in CNN's Kara Scannell, who's tracking the changing, evolving timeline of events. Kara, bring us up to date. What Rudy Giuliani, his admission right there means, and what folks should do with it now.
Well, Kate, I mean, you're right. This has been a confusing and often changing timeline. But what Rudy Giuliani did was say that conversations to build a Trump Tower in Moscow between the organization had continued up until the election. Now, when Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to lying to Congress about this very timeline, they said it was until June. So now we know that this continued several months longer than we did just a few months ago. And why this is significant is that, this opens the president up to additional scrutiny. During this time period, the candidate then, Donald Trump, was talking about, questioning the legitimacy of NATO. He was talking about easing sanctions on Russia and calling upon Russia to release hacked emails from the Democratic Party. So now Giuliani has put his own client kind of in the crosshairs here, going straight to the heart of this investigation of collusion. But that's not all, Kate. Giuliani also suggested to our own Jake Tapper yesterday that it's possible that Donald Trump was speaking to Michael Cohen right up until his congressional testimony. Let's take a listen to what he said.
As far as I know, President Trump did not have discussions with him, certainly had no discussions with him in which he told him or counseled him to lie. If he had any discussions with him, they'd be about the version of the events that Michael Cohen gave then, which they all believe was true.
But you just acknowledged that it's possible that President Trump talked to Michael Cohen about his testimony.
Which would be perfectly normal, which the president believed was true.
So it's possible that happened, that President Trump talked to Michael Cohen about his
testimony. I don't know if
it
happened or didn't happen. And it might be attorney-client privileged if it happened, where I can't acknowledge it. But I have no knowledge that he spoke to him.
But you just acknowledged that President Trump might have talked to him about his testimony.
And so what if he talked to him about it?
Well, so what, right? I mean, I think the issue here is so what is, it does matter because that is the essence of this crime, that Michael Cohen has said that he lied to Congress. Now, of course, this all relates to the BuzzFeed story that broke late last week, in which they said that there was evidence that the special counsel's office had that Donald Trump directed Michael Cohen to lie. The special counsel's office came out on Friday with a very rare statement, shooting down the report, saying that it was just not accurate. Kate.
Kara, thank you so much. A lot to follow, per usual. Thanks to Rudy Giuliani. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Let's cut through it right now. CNN legal analyst Shan Wu is with me now. So Rudy Giuliani, Shan, now leaving open the possibility that the president was negotiating with Russia to build a Trump Tower in Moscow throughout the entire 2016 campaign. He said that to New York Times. He told that to the New York Times. He said that to CNN. He also said that to NBC. So this was not a one-off when he was talking about this. This admission, it means what?
Well, it means there's certainly, in hindsight, a lot of basis for the counterintelligence concerns. And I think it's very important to notice what Giuliani was saying about the timeline of the answers given to Mueller. He's saying we only answered up until the time he became president. Frankly, that leaves room to say that maybe those conversations continued even after he became president. Giuliani's style here, obviously rather mercurial. It's a little bit like throw everything and see what sticks kind of style right now. But it's obviously of great concern if the president's timeline for when he's involved in this Russian negotiation is moving later and later into him actually becoming president.
And what do you make of Giuliani's argument, and this kind of goes with both of the things that he's talking about, that he may or may not remember when the negotiations about Trump Tower ended, may or may not remember when he was what he was talking to Michael Cohen about. What does that mean?
Well, he's trying to lay the defense of he doesn't necessarily recollect the specifics because he's a very busy guy. When you listen to his interviews with Jake, he's saying about how much Michael Cohen would be the guy who would know the details. You know, Trump's
so now
too
we're
busy.
supposed to believe Michael Cohen. I mean, I'm confused.
Exactly. That's exactly right, which is, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you want to say, well, Trump's too busy, so listen to Cohen, but we'll tell you when Cohen's telling the truth and when he's lying. So it really doesn't work in that sense because you really have to depend upon Giuliani as being the interpreter of the truth.
Stop laughing. What does Robert Mueller do first with this new timeline about how long Trump Tower Moscow was actually being negotiated throughout the entire campaign? Oh, maybe more importantly, the fact that we've had different dates of when the negotiation ended. Does Mueller do something with this?
Mueller, most likely, Kate, has already been doing something with this. I think,
kidding.
you know, we're always a little bit behind the curve in terms of learning this.
I feel like we're like 6 months behind the curve when it comes to Mueller.
Right, that's exactly right. And so they probably already know how deep into the actual presidency or right leading up to taking office that these negotiations continued. And from a national security standpoint, that is the big concern. And it is most likely why the president's lawyers drew the line at only wanting to give answers under oath, written or otherwise, up until the time he became president. They're really trying to protect him as much as possible by walling things off. And even though Giuliani is really more of a PR spin right now than he is lawyering, it's more like a spinning class than the lawyering class, he unquestionably senses the danger to his client. And he's the private lawyer. He's not the Office of White House Counsel or defending. So he's really still trying very hard to protect Trump from any future danger that he's talked himself into.
On this question of whether Donald Trump talked to Michael Cohen about his testimony to Congress, Giuliani says, you heard it, Kara played the soundbite, so what? He says it's perfectly normal. But George Conway, Kellyanne Conway's husband, who is also a big-name conservative attorney, he calls it perfectly insane rather than perfectly normal. Which is it?
It's definitely trending towards the perfectly insane. I mean, as you know from talking to many criminal defense lawyers, there are many rule number ones in criminal defense. So I'll say this is rule number 1 through 20. I'll say don't have your client talk to somebody else who's under investigation. And it just makes no sense. That's absolutely not perfectly normal. It completely opens him up to allegations and suspicions that he's tampering with the testimony. And from a common sense standpoint, there's no reason for the president to be talking to Michael Cohen before he testifies before Congress. No reason whatsoever. And so if that happened, it's very likely that Cohen would be interpreting that as some sort of a nuanced message. Now, the president's not known for his nuance, certainly, but you just don't do that. There's no need to do that. It exposes the client to tremendous danger, and it's very likely going to be interpreted by the witness as some sort of message.
Yeah, the why, what the motivation was of speaking, I guess, is a huge question now. But yes, that's true. Me being not an attorney and not having been a criminal defendant, at least yet, I do know, Shan, the one thing you've taught me is just stop talking. Just stop talking. There's your rules. Great to see you, Shan. Thank you.
Good to see you.
The most trusted name in news.
She is running. After months of speculation, Democratic Senator from California, Kamala Harris, made her big announcement this morning.
I am running for president of the United States.
Well,
and I'm very excited about it. I have the unique experience of having been a leader in local government, state government, and federal government. What I believe the American people want and their next commander-in-chief is someone who has leadership skills, who has experience, and has integrity, and will fight on their behalf.
Senator Harris joins a growing field of Democrats who have announced that they're officially running for president in 2020, or have formed committees to say they're looking into it, which means they're going to be running, including 2 other female senators. CNN's Kyung La joins me now live from Washington. Kyung, the Senator Harris, said this morning that she was honored to announce her candidacy on MLK Day. What are you learning about the announcement and the candidate?
Well, all of this was very carefully timed, not just for MLK Day, but it was 47 years ago this week that Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman to ever run for president, launched her campaign. So steeped in this symbolism, Senator Kamala Harris jumped into the race.
That's why I'm running for president of the United States.
Senator Kamala Harris announcing her presidential campaign's core principles on Martin Luther King Day.
Truth, justice, decency, equality, freedom, democracy, These aren't just words. They're the values we as Americans cherish. And they're all on the line now.
I intend to fight for truth and transparency and trust. I intend to fight.
California's junior senator is notable both in biography
I do.
and her 2-year tenure in the Senate. Supporters hail Harris's rapid-fire questioning in the Senate from Supreme Court nominees.
Can you think of any laws that give the government the power to make decisions about the male body?
I'm not thinking of any right now, Senator.
To Justice Department officials.
He has the
yes or no, sir.
He has the full independence that is authorized by those regulations. And
Are
Senator,
you willing
as I said,
to do as has been done before?
Would the senator suspend?
Making more than one of them squirm.
I'm not able to be rushed this fast. It makes me nervous.
A lot of the work I've done has been inspired.
The native of Oakland says she embodies everything California stands for and what the president is against. She is the daughter of immigrants, a father from Jamaica and a mother from southern India, both active in the civil rights era.
So it was about fighting for justice. It was about fighting to make sure that all people had a say in their future.
Harris graduated from Howard University, returning to Oakland to become a prosecutor. As a San Francisco district attorney, Harris crafted innovative programs to reform the criminal justice system at a time when other prosecutors were taking a tough-on-crime approach. And despite political pressure from her own party, she refused to seek the death penalty against the killer of a police officer, sticking to a core campaign pledge and personal belief.
Humbled to be chosen to be the next Attorney General of the state of California.
But she would defend the death penalty as California's first black woman Attorney General, still personally opposed, but upholding state law, coming under fire from activists.
I now declare you spouses for life.
When the Supreme Court allowed marriage equality to stand in California, she officiated the first legal same-sex marriages in 2013.
Any day that justice is delayed, I would suggest justice is denied.
All part of her pledge to be a progressive prosecutor.
It is a false choice to suggest that one is either in favor of the Second Amendment or in favor of reasonable gun safety rules. We can be both.
That history is both an asset and an opening for attack.
We are so brave and we are so...
A question that may follow her to the campaign as it did on her book tour. Is it possible to be both a top cop and a reformer for progressives?
What do you say to those who hear that and read that and still say, well, you're anti-police?
Well, it's just not true.
I mean, I had to ask.
That's why I say we got to talk truth.
It's just not true. It's not true. It's not true, period.
And her race is off and running. She heads to South Carolina this week, then home to Oakland for a rally officially launching her campaign. And then the following day, Kate, she will head to Iowa, where she will be having a town hall hosted by CNN, moderated by Jake Tapper, where Iowa voters will be able to directly ask her questions. Kate?
You jump in the race and you hit the ground running. It's great to see you, Kyung. Thank you so much.
You bet.
So coming up for us, as Kamala Harris jumps in the race for 2020, does that mean the pressure is now mounting for anyone who's going to do the same to do it now? And does today offer any action on its way? It's not just Kamala Harris. Just about everyone who's announced or is even thinking about announcing a run for president is out and about on this day that we commemorate the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Take a look at this map. This is of today. Former Vice President Joe Biden, former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, they're at an MLK breakfast in Washington. Senator Elizabeth Warren, she's attending a King Memorial breakfast in Boston. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand has an event later today in her home state of New York. New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, they are both in South Carolina marking the day's events. CNN's Rebecca Buck is in Columbia, South Carolina, where a lot of this is playing out. Rebecca, what are you hearing there?
That's right, Kate. Well, Bernie Sanders, Cory Booker, neither of them have announced that they are officially in the race for president yet, but they will both be speaking on the Capitol steps just behind me here today, sending an unmistakable message that they are taking South Carolina and the African American vote very seriously as they prepare for potential campaigns. Of course, South Carolina, home to the first in the South primary, 61% of the Democratic primary electorate here was African American during the 2016 election. But Bernie Sanders and Cory Booker in very different places when it comes to cultivating their relationship with this community. Cory Booker, of course, an African American candidate himself. He spent the weekend with civil rights icon John Lewis in Georgia, going around talking about Martin Luther King, talking about the civil rights movement. He often talks about the civil rights movement in his stump speech as a core part of who he would be as a candidate. Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, struggled in 2016 with African American voters. We spoke with Congressman Clyburn here today, and he said Bernie Sanders did have some challenges, but he believes he's working to fix them, and that this appearance here today sends a very strong message in that regard. Kate.
Important to hear from everyone on this day. Great to see you, Rebecca. Thank you so much. Joining me right now, Mark Preston, CNN senior political analyst, and also Maeve Reston, CNN national political reporter. It's great to see you guys. Mark, if there was any question of the dominant role the African American voters are going to play in the Democratic primary this time around, does this non-campaign campaign stop in South Carolina answer that for everyone?
Look, they always have played an outsized role, and the question is right now is where will they play that role outside of the traditional states such as South Carolina? You're absolutely right. If you look at somebody like Kamala Harris, who's looking at starting her campaign in Iowa, but the whole idea is that Iowa can slingshot her to New Hampshire, which could then slingshot her down to South Carolina, where she could perhaps find a very friendly constituency. But also we're going to see the calendar change, and we're also going to see African Americans play a big role in states such as California, which is going to be voting on March 3rd. So, yes, Kate, listen, this is a big deal. That's why we're seeing everyone across the country right now, or at least those interested in seeking the Democratic nomination, attend these events.
Absolutely. And Maeve, I know you've been covering the building up of the Kamala Harris campaign very closely. And as Mark is pointing out, the kind of her path. She's heading to South Carolina on Friday. Does her path to victory go through South Carolina, do you see, rather than Iowa and New Hampshire?
I mean, South Carolina, Kate, it really is what she wants to be her launch pad. They are looking at trying to get a strong finish in Iowa and New Hampshire that would then give her some momentum to go into South Carolina, where she would hope to consolidate that African-American vote, and particularly with her strong appeal among African-American women, who, as we know, are the key to the Democratic nomination and some of the most reliable voters for Democrats. But then beyond that, as you look at the calendar, and Mark just mentioned that this could change, what they see as their path is this swing through the southeastern states that dominate the early calendar. States like Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, a lot of those states where she potentially could talk to voters about her unique appeal as the daughter of immigrants, her mother from India and father from Jamaica, someone who grew up with a stroller's eye view of the civil rights movement. That is the image that she's trying to put forward. It's why she announced today, and clearly that's what they hope her path will be, Kate.
Mark, a week from today, CNN's hosting a town hall just announced with Harris in Iowa. What do you think the big questions are that she's going to be facing there?
Well, a couple of things. One, can you imagine that we're actually talking about doing town halls for a presidential race in Iowa? I mean, my gosh, it only seems like yesterday
unusual.
Because it was like just yesterday, wasn't
it?
Look, she is going to get a lot of questions about her past and her history and her work as the DA in San Francisco, as well as the Attorney General. And was she too tough on sentencing? Was she somebody that could have taken a greater stand against the injustice and the harsh sentencing penalties that we have seen? So certainly, you would think that that's going to be a lot of the questioning that she'll receive, not only next week but throughout the campaign.
Well, well, we all love a one-on-one interview, says every journalist everywhere. But I do love the town hall format. It is really illustrative in how they handle the questions that are coming at them and interacting with voters and caucus goers. It's a great opportunity.
Totally wild.
Totally wild, Maeve. So Mark just hit on it, Maeve. But part of the background that Harris talks about a lot is her history as a prosecutor. But it is that history that some in her own party they do have questions about, will have questions about. She was asked about it this morning on ABC. Let me play you what she said.
You say the left has to get over its bias against law enforcement. What did you mean by that? And do you think that's going to be a problem for you in the Democratic primaries?
I think it is a false choice to suggest that communities don't want law enforcement. Most communities do. They don't want excessive force. They don't want racial profiling, but then nobody should.
Look, there was a lot of political energy around Black Lives Matter in 2016 and beyond.
Yes.
In a movement that you see heading into 2020, how is that answer going to play?
You know, I think, Kate, that this is the biggest question facing her candidacy, because really her background as a prosecutor is her double-edged sword. It is the reason why she has been so effective at drilling those Trump nominees, from Brett Kavanaugh to John Kelly, all the way down the line. People love that idea of toughness, that she would stand up to the big banks as Attorney General and also wouldn't be bullied by Trump. At the same time, she has a very long and complex record as a prosecutor, and there are a lot of cases that cut both ways. I mean, she was overseeing, for example, the crime lab when there was a huge scandal in San Francisco about evidence being tainted in some of the drug crimes. She took a position on the death penalty. She personally opposed it, but then defended it as Attorney General out of professional duty. So a lot of activists are going to have to come to grips with that and decide whether she can be their nominee, Kate.
Some of the questions she's going to be getting 1 week from today in the CNN Town Hall. Great to see you guys. Thank you so much. As Mark talked about, as I'm talking about, CNN is hosting this Town Hall with Kamala Harris in Des Moines next Monday, 10 p.m. Eastern. Jake Tapper moderates. We'll all be there. Coming up, there was outrage after video of a standoff between a Kentucky teenager and a Native American elder went in the social media age of instant outrage. There seems no time ever anymore for backstory or context or a full view of any story. That could be the case with this most recent viral video that's proving to be more complicated than first thought. A Kentucky teenager wearing a Make America Great Again hat seems to be staring down a Native American elder Friday in Washington. That student is now sharing his side of the story. And CNN's Sarah Seidner has been following all of this and looking into all of this. There's a lot more video, Sarah, than just that moment that most folks saw on Friday.
Yeah,
what are you learning?
Yeah, there almost always is, Kate. And he was indeed staring down into the face of a Native American elder, but then the elder was doing the same. And what we've seen in an hour-plus long video is what happened before that and how the two groups came together and how nasty things were before they even came face to face. The video that went viral. The Catholic high school student who comes face to face with a Native American elder in a viral video is now responding. In a statement, student Nick Sandman says the viral video does not reflect the true nature of events when the students arrived at the Lincoln Memorial. When we arrived, we noticed 4 African American protesters who were also on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, he said. The protesters said hateful things. Indeed, a small group of black men who identify as Hebrew Israelites did say hateful things to seemingly everyone around them, including a priest.
Let's make America great again. A bunch of child molesting
and the students.
See how you got these pompous bastards come down here in the middle of a native rally with their dirty ass hat on?
When a black visitor tries to stand up against their rhetoric, he faces hate too.
You got all these dirty ass crackers behind you with a red Make America Great hat again on, and your coon ass, you want to fight your brother.
At first, the Catholic students there for the March for Life are still in small numbers, but more and more show up, watching but not engaging. The small group of men continue taunting them.
A bunch of incest babies. A bunch of babies made out of incest.
Sandman says the rhetoric was startling. Because we were being loudly attacked and taunted in public, a student asked one of our teacher chaperones for permission to begin school spirit chants to counter the hateful things that were being shouted at our group. And they do. At one point, a student removes his shirt and the chants drown everything out. 2 minutes later, you hear a drum beat. That is Nathan Phillips, an Omaha tribe elder, and another drummer. Phillips says it was their attempt to thwart potential violence. The kids danced to it. They began chanting along.
I realized I had put myself in a really dangerous situation. You know, it's like, here's a group of people who were angry at somebody else, and I put myself in front of that.
Phillips, a Vietnam veteran, walks around. Other students avoid him until you see him come face to face with the student who has now gone viral. In his statement, the student says he was the one trying to de-escalate the situation, not Phillips. I believe that by remaining motionless and calm, I was helping to defuse the situation. I realized everyone had cameras and that perhaps a group of adults was trying to provoke a group of teenagers into a larger conflict. Sandman has every opportunity to move back. So does Phillips. Neither do. While they faced off, the kids face more taunting from the Hebrew Israelite group.
This is a bunch of future school shooters.
That's right.
Sandman says it was the adults using hateful words and trying to provoke the kids, not the other way around. Now, the diocese that oversees the Covington Catholic High School, after the initial viral video came out, said that they condemned the students' actions towards Nathaniel Phillips, the elder there, and towards Native Americans in general. They have still not rescinded that condemnation, saying that there is going to be an investigation. The mayor of the city also condemned, but a congressman, Thomas Massey, who represents the district, says that he actually backs these kids and believes that they were the target of bigotry and hatred, and he wanted to make clear that he stands with them. Kate?
And it takes, Sarah, thank you for taking the time to give some more context about all of this. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Coming up, Democrats stand their ground, rejecting the president's new plan for border wall money and to reopen the government. So how much worse does it have to get before they all start talking? That's coming up.